watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. From Singapore, joining us, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. Prof, good to see you on StratNews again, and I'm sorry for disturbing you so late, your time on a Friday evening.
Happy to join you.
Professor, just looking at what's happening in the counting in the US and the results after that, now it's extremely likely that Joe Biden will be the next president, though they still have to look at Pennsylvania. He's taken Georgia for the moment, etc. But wanted to get your view on how do you think anything will change in terms of, say, the US-China belligerent, aggressive relationship if the former vice president is the next incumbent of the White House?
Well, I think, there's such a deep consensus in the United States body politic that the time has come for the United States to stand up to China. And that's what basically I've written about in my book, Has China Won? So the biggest strategic mistake that Joe Biden can make is to appear to be soft on China. If he appears to be soft on China, the Republicans will eat him up. So he has no choice. His hands are tied politically. He has to come out like a real fighter against China. But having done that, I expect that what he will do after that is that he will try to be pragmatic. And frankly, if you look at the trade war, for example, when Donald Trump says trade wars are easy to win and we're going to win them, he hasn't won the trade war. The trade deficit with China looks very significant. So I think Joe Biden, at the end, they will be more pragmatic than Donald Trump.
More pragmatic, but you're saying like he'll have to come out of his corner throwing all punches against China because of the situation that China has in many ways, in fact, painted itself into. How do you see what China has done so far in terms of, are they watching to see what the results are? Does Xi Jinping and the CCP prefer one candidate over the other?
Well, one thing, one of the best quotes I have in my book, Has China Won, is a description of a one-on-one lunch I had with Henry Kissinger, who's still, I think, America's greatest living strategic thinker. And he says the fundamental problem that America has made with China is that America does not have a long-term strategy on dealing with China. It's reacting erratically, doing this, doing that, but there's no strategy behind it all. And by contrast, I mean, what he was implying is that the Chinese play a long game. So it's for the Chinese, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, they have a problem. But in the case of if Trump had won, the Chinese would have got short-term pain, but long-term gain because Trump has destroyed the Western alliance. And a very prominent Western figure said to me in private, Kishore, if Trump gets re-elected, the West is dead, gone. So then that would be a gift to China. On the other hand, with Biden, they will get short-term gain in the sense that Biden will be more nicer, more civil, and certainly more courteous and not insult China as much. But the Western alliance will come back. And so China will have to deal with a more formidable rival, surprisingly, with Biden than with Donald Trump. So you can see this. But I suspect they have calculated how to deal with Trump, calculated how to deal with and Biden, and they're playing the long-term game. And 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, China's GNP will become bigger. And so that's a different game, It's one thing when your GNP is smaller, but when your GNP is bigger, you are in a much stronger position. That's a different negotiating position.
When you're referring to Biden giving short-term gain and long-term pain, I presume you're looking at the allies like Europe coming together again, because we've seen what Trump has done, maybe Korea and Japan, which are drifting off, also strengthening the anti-China partnership, if you want to call it that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I think very clearly the Europeans have also begun to develop reservations about China. But the Europeans, as you know, also had reservations about Donald Trump and the way he was handling China. They didn't think that's the right way to do, because clearly, I mean, if you look at the Germans, their number one market for their automobiles is not United States, it's China, right?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
1 in
And
3
that's precisely why
Volkswagens
Angela
sold
Merkel
in
has
China.
been
1 in 4
behaving
BMW is sold in
that.
China. 1 in 4
Yeah.
Mercedes is sold in China. So the Europeans clearly they want to work with the United States to open up the Chinese market and to have a more level playing field dealing with the Chinese. But they didn't think that Trump's tactics were the way to go about doing it. So clearly, yes, you're right, that Europe and United States will definitely come closer together under a Biden administration.
You were talking about Biden probably smoothing out the rough edges, so as to speak, in terms of diplomacy and involving the State Department more rather than the Defense Department, as Trump has done. So you won't see like Pompeo going to Sri Lanka and saying that the CCP is a predator, and then going to Maldives and Vietnam and Indonesia. That visit itself of Pompeo's signaling just before the election results, voting and results, what the Trump administration was trying to do.
Well, I think the tragedy of the Trump administration is that even the closest friends and allies of the United States felt very uncomfortable with the Trump administration. And Mike Pompeo, when I remember when I was ambassador to the UN in the 80s, working with George Shultz, who's come up with a brilliant new essay, by the way, on trust. George Shultz said, at the end of the day, what you need to do is establish trust, both with your friends and your adversaries. And he described how arms control began with the Soviet Union. It's a question of developing trust. And in the case of the Trump administration, certainly under Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the trust between America and its friends and allies has gone down. And that has, of course, been a big bonus to China, because the United States is standing very much alone in the way it deals with the rest of the world under the Trump administration.
But when you say trust, there are hardly any countries that trust Beijing or the CCP or Xi Jinping anymore, except possibly for Pakistan and North Korea.
That's a very good question. And the question is whether the Chinese work on the basis of trust or work on the basis of win-win relationships. And the Chinese don't believe in this theory that international relations is going to be determined primarily by trust, and they're working very much on making sure that you benefit from the relationship. So at the end of the day, even if you don't like China, even if you don't trust them, you look at where you stand. And recently there was a wonderful article by a former Indonesian ambassador to United States. Dino Jalal is his name. Please read this article. And he says that Southeast Asia is very, very uncomfortable when the Americans come saying, you got to choose, you got to choose. They say, what do you mean choose? We have good relations with the United States. Indonesia does. Mike Pompeo, in the pictures you showed, was in Jakarta meeting President Jokowi. But Indonesia has also got good relations with China. And so they say we have to deal with both. And when the United States come charging in and says you got to choose one or the other, it's going to be a problem, especially in the next 4 years. Because the United States today is a wounded tiger, very much a wounded tiger. And it's got to focus so much internally.
Yeah.
People know that it doesn't have the strength or the resources today to be the same strong. When the paradox today is that when China became an ally of the United States in the Cold War in the 1980s, you had a very strong, self-confident America that China was basically an ally with. But today, if you want to become an ally of the United States, you're not dealing with a strong, self-confident America. You're dealing with a hugely divided America. And Biden cannot ignore the fact that 70 million, now let me repeat that, 70 million Americans voted for Trump. That's the third highest vote any American presidential candidate has received in history. So it's a seriously divided country. And a seriously divided country cannot play the same kind of confident a global leadership role that the United States could do in the 80s and 90s and even 2000s.
So the partnerships that were being developed, we know what Pompeo was trying to do, and his visits in the capitals that he chose to go clearly evident. But just before that was the 2+2 with India as well. Currently, you have the first phase of the Malabar Quad military exercises with Japan, Australia, the US, and the Indian Navy. The next phase is said to be even more special in terms of the vessels that will be used, speculation of aircraft carriers, etc. How do you see the Quad, in fact, progressing under Biden? Will he change anything?
Well, I think the Quad will continue. But, if you don't mind, I'll be very frank, okay?
Yeah.
As someone who was in diplomacy for 33 years, at some point in time, Australia cannot alienate its number one market. Australia exports 3 to 4 times to China what it does export to United States. And I think at some point in time, I don't know when, Australia will realize, hey, we cannot afford to alienate the number one economic partner, and you will see one of the partners in the Quad being a bit nervous. And the Japanese also are becoming very, very careful in their relationships with China. And yeah, at the end of the day, the Japanese have lived next door to China for 1,000 years, and most of the time they have lived in peace with China. So they are making some kind of accommodation also in their own way. So it's not a straight, unlike the alliance against the Soviet Union, where everything was black and white. Australia didn't trade with the Soviet Union, had zero trade with the Soviet Union, and was happy to be 100% partner of the United States. But I expect that the pain for Australia will grow significantly in the next few years, and you'll find that Australia will have to adjust.
Yeah, you're saying that it'll go back to what it did before. The Quad itself, one of the reasons why it died and had to be resurrected was because of Prime Minister Rudd there. But India has been facing issues. 20 of our soldiers were killed. You can have all the navies and all the militaries together, but they are at our doorstep. How do you see India reacting to China? I mean, we've already seen a very strong statement today from the Chief of Defense Staff as well. How should India play it? Because you're talking about a win-win, but there is no win-win with China, destroying all the framework agreements that had been reached over decades, and unilaterally trying to change the LSE.
Well, I mean, India is in a very unusual position. On the one hand, it's under a lot of stress, and you described the stress very well. On the other hand, it also has a magnificent geopolitical opportunity, because the world actually is very uncomfortable with the US-China geopolitical contest at a time when we have other pressing concerns to deal with, like COVID-19, like global warming, and they would like a more stable world. And so if India emerges as a strong, independent third pole, that gives it the greatest amount of leverage in dealing. And if you can imagine a seesaw, right? China on the one side and the United States on the other side. And if India stands in the middle, where India puts its foot affects the whole seesaw balance. And that's basically a game that China also played, as you know, in the Cold War, having good relations with United States, but maintaining their ties with the Soviet Union. So, and I'm reading Jay Shankar's book, The India Way, and one of the wisest things he says yes, India has joined the Quad. We will work closely with Australia, Japan, United States. But at the same time, we are also working with China and Russia in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Sun. So the best place for India to be, and India is big enough to be, is to be an independent pole. And frankly, the rest of the world wants to see a strong, independent India that can then provide an alternative to these two giants who are going to, as I document in my book, as China won. The US-China geopolitical contest will continue in the next 10 to 20 years. And if India is an independent pole, many countries will come to India and say, okay, let's work together independently.
So you're looking again at the long term, but in the short term, how does India deal with China? I mean, there is no way that anything can happen unless the Chinese move back to a position pre-April.
Well, I think I'm not an expert on the border issues, but I'm told that that the 3 times the Chinese offered to India, saying why don't we accept the status quo, right? I mean, as you know,
but it's a changed status quo. So
Joe and Lai offered it to, I think, Prime Minister.
You're going back into 1950s.
And then Deng Xiaoping offered it to Rajiv Gandhi. But I'm told anyway that nowadays Indian diplomats ask the Chinese, why don't you put the same offer on the table? And the Chinese reply, why did you accept it? So I mean, it's a sort of bizarre situation here. But I do think at the end of the day, what's more important than the differences on the border is for India to emerge as a very strong, vibrant economy. Because at the end of the day, it's the size of the economy that determines where you go in the future. And in 1980, India's economy and China's economy were the same size. Yeah. Today, China's economy is 5 times the size of India. So what we need to do, frankly, if I was Indian, is to first focus on the economy and get it growing as fast as possible. Because if you really want to counterbalance China, the best way to do it is to grow your economy. And the best way to grow your economy is to open up your economy. And if you notice that even the United States, under Donald Trump, who's a friend of India, cut off your generalized scheme of preferences, cut off your H-1B visas, that actually have hurt India, So but there's a certain point where Indians got to realize that, and I say this as an Indian, Indians are the most competitive economic animals in the world by far. There's no Chinese running Google. There's no Chinese running Microsoft. It's Indians running Microsoft and Google. So if you open up, Indians can compete. So the focus of India's strategy should be on growing its economy as fast as possible. Because once your economy becomes as strong as China, that's a different game completely.
Professor Kishore Mahbubani, again, thank you so much for your time and joining us from Singapore.
My pleasure.
If you do like kind of journalism, these kind of interviews or the reports we put out, do log on to our website and you can help support us. Do also follow us on our social media handles on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram. You've been watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.